So we're going to be talking about loop in this chapter. Previously we talked about the Python collection, so in this chapter we're going to be talking about the loop and other things we'll be talking about. So loop allows one to repeat a line of code or a block of code over and over and over again, as long as the condition has to be true. That's the character, that's the main thing there. The condition has to be true for it to work. So we have two commands in Python which we use for looping. So we have the while loop and we have the for loop. So we're actually going to show examples where this command works. So I'm going to be delving to my I'm going to be going to my VS Code, and then I'm going to be I have a file already created here called loop.py. So I'm going to assign a variable, and I have the variable assigned as equal to, let me say, 30, x equal to 30. I'm taking away the white spaces, equal to 30. So I'll say while passing a condition, right? While x is less than 60. Let me make shorter this thing, shorter condition is less than 40, print x. Then this particular code is actually true, the condition is actually true, but if I save this guy and go to my terminal and run it, it's actually going to print over and over again. Like, it's going to, the looping will not stop, it will continue like forever, and might actually cause a problem to your laptop. So to avoid this, we are going to use an assignment operator to enable a termination of this code when it gets to 40. So I'm going to say x is plus equal to 1, and then I'll save it. I'll come here and say python loop.py, run my code. So if you check from here, I'm having 30 to 40. So if I still assign this, if I say equal to, less than or equal to, 40, it's still going to give me the same thing. Did I save it? Yes, I did. But it stopped at 40. The initial one I had stopped at 39, but this one I'm having here is stopping at 40. So this is how the while loop works for us. So also we can apply what we call the break statement and the continuous statement in each of those loop. So the break statement actually it stops the loop if the condition is true. So if I throw in a condition, oh, break this, it's actually going to stop it completely. So that is what the break does for you. Maybe you are trying to loop, you might use a break statement to break off this when it gets to whatever you want it to do. So I've already assigned this guy here. I passed in this guy here. I'm still using the same example I'm working on. So I would say I'll now say pass in another condition. If x is equal to, let me say 35, it's a condition, right? So remember to put your colon. So I'll now say break. So whenever x gets to 35, break. I'll then put my assignment operator. I'll say x is plus equal to 1. Keep a space here, plus equal to 1. Then I save it and come to my terminal, and I'll then run the code. So if you see, check my terminal, it's actually looping through, but once it got to when it got to 35, it did what the condition was actually true. Based on what I passed in, it stopped automatically. So this is what breaks does for you. So we have the continuous statement. We use continuous statement to stop a current iteration. So you don't want a particular condition to show. Maybe you are performing a task and you want this particular condition not to display. So you use continuous and place the exact condition to it. Let me say here now I have this guy, I have while loop here, and then I will then pass in x plus equal to 1, right? Then I will then say if x is equal to 35, I'll say continue. Instead of using break, right, I would say continue. Then I would come here and say then print what? Print x. So when the condition continue works, it will then continue printing. So when I come here and run my code here, I already saved it, right? So I have here, from this line I have 31, I have up to, when it got to, if you check here, when it got to 34, it jumped over 35, where I said, oh, when it gets to this condition, look, jump over it and still continue printing the other y conditions and loop through it. So this is what a continue statement does for us in Python. So another type of loop we mentioned, because we said we have two types of loop command, which we've showed some examples of. While we can actually be while on our at our own convenient time, we can try plenty examples. So we have the for loop. So the for loop is still used to iterate over a sequence. So just like we used the while loop to loop over and over a block of code, we still use for loop to still loop over and over a block of code. So for the for loop, you can iterate over a sequence, like you can iterate over a list, like we mentioned previously. We talked about list, we talked about tuple, dictionary, and a set or a string. So you can loop using a for loop to display over these iterations, over these sequences, sorry. So this is what the for loop does for us. So I'm going to comment on this guy here. I'll take it out. So I will then say for, I'm trying to pass in so I'll pass in a variable and say fruit, passing a list. I'm trying to pass in, this is a list, like we said, we iterate over a sequence. So this is one of the sequence, which is a list. I will now pass in fruits, values to fruits. I would say apple, it's a string. I'll say apple, I'll say cherry. I'm just going to use two examples for us to show, and then I would pass in a condition for x in what? In fruit, because the condition, we remember to put our colon. I'll then say print what? Print x. So it's just like you're assigning another name to fruit, and then inside it, like when we talked about operators, we made use of in, so to loop this. So I'm going to now print this guy and then come to this place and say python loop.py, then run it. I'm going to run this guy. Okay, so if you see, I'm iterating over it, right? It's displaying what I have in my in my list. So this is what an example of how a for loop works. So I can still loop through my string, like we said we can loop through string. Let me say I have place, equal to Kenya. I have Kenya, or country, anyone you want to call it. So I would have x in place, then print x. So I'm trying to loop over a string. So if I come here and run my code, are you seeing it's looping over this string we have here? So this is how for loop works. So we can still make apply this break statement and also continue statement in for loop, just like we applied it in the while loop. So I have here, I'm going to use this example I have above here. I'm going to uncomment this guy here. So we said I passed in values to fruits, right? print fruit. So I will then say, if, pass another condition, if x is equal to, so I'm trying to say, oh, if x has this value, break it. Like, let me add another value here so that we would have a better understanding of what we're talking about. So I have cherry and I have mango. So I'll say, if x is equal to cashew here, if is equal to cashew, then because it's a condition, our semicolon, I would say what, break. So I'll come to my terminal and run my code. Are you seeing it? So when it was actually looping these values in fruit, and when it got to cashew, it stopped, it break, it applied the break statement. So this is how break works in for loop. So we can still show how the continuous statement also works in for loop. So I'm actually going to still make use of this, my example. I have for x in fruit, so I will then say, if, so I'm going to take away this guy, I'll then say, if x is equal to cashew, continue. Then under it I would say print x. Are we seeing? So it was printing for us, it was looping through the values. We have apple, we have cherry, we have, it got to cashew, and then it jumped, it passed it, and then continued its looping. So this is how a continued statement works in for loop. So we have the range functions. So we've talked about the for loop, and we've talked about the the while loop. So we have the range function. So we also use range functions in for loop. So this is how the range function works. It returns a sequence of numbers starting, it has 0 as a default, so it returns a sequence of number starting from 0, and then it will now be increasing to the end of the specific number you have based on the condition you passed in. So I'm going to take away this guy. So I want to loop over numbers, right? So I'll then say, for x in, I'm using the function range. We talked about using the use of the function range in a for loop. So for range, so I'm going to pass in a value 6, or let me say 10. Then I would say print x. So I'm printing x. Are you seeing? We said it actually started, it has a default of 0 as a starting point. We're actually looping through it, and it's going to start from 0, and then it will stop, because we have it like between 0 and what, 10. Like it's going to display 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then to the least number before what, before 10. If I pass in 11 here, it's going to display for me 0 to 10, because 0 is actually a number in it, but it's 11 digits, but 0 is a default number there. So I'm going to loop over it, loop through it, and then I have 0, 1, 2, 10. That is how the function range works in for loop. So we can still try other examples. So we can try other examples for range. So I can still have this guy here. I will say I can still pass in, like, instead of having a default, like we said, we have a default 0. Instead of having a default 0, I can still say for x in range. So I can pass in a value here. I would say 5 to 30. That is, it's going to loop between the number of, it should have been 0 to 30, right? But it will stop at 29. But in this case, I'm giving it a default of 5, so it's not going to be having a default of 0 anymore. Rather, it's going to be starting from 5. I'll now say print what? Print x. So we're going to see, I'm going to comment on this guy so we can get a clarity on the output. So I'm going to save this guy and come here and run it. So are you seeing what we have here? Are you seeing what we have here? It started from 5, so I gave it a default start of 5. So this is how it works. So you can still, the range has different methods. I can still apply range function using this. I'll say for x in range 2, I would say starting, I'll give it range, I'll give it a default start, right? And then, sorry, I didn't put in, and then say I want it 50. You should start from 5, right? You start from 3, right? And then stop at 27. I want 27. Then it should be in 3s. So this example is telling us that because it's a condition, right? I'm going to put my colon and say print x. I'm printing x. Print x. Save. I'm saving this guy. So I'm going to comment on this guy. So I'm running this code. So the actual meaning of this code is that it has a default start of what? Of 3, and it's going to loop over 27 digits, and it's going to be in 3s. That is 3 plus 3 is going to give me 6. So another number after 6 is going to give me what? It's going to give me 9. So another number after 9 is going to be looping it through in 3 forms. So let us see what we are talking about. So I'm going to come here and then run my code. Sorry, I did not save it. I'm going to come here and run my code. So we see what we have. We have numbers between, like numbers in 3 forms. It's going to give me 3, 6, 9, and the rest of it till it stops. So this is how we use the range function in the for loop. So we can still use else. We can still use else in for loop, like passing an else statement. Sorry, an else condition in for loop. I could say for x in range 15. Okay. Print x else print finished looping. So I'm going to save this guy and come to this terminal and run my code. So are we seeing that it looped over it like 0 to 14, then it said finished looping. So this is how we make use of our for. So we can still have nested loops, right? Nested loop is when we have a loop inside a loop. That is, we have a child loop inside a parent loop. So I'm actually going to take away these guys to see how nested loop works. So I'm going to have places. I'm going to have first underscore name. Sorry for the wrong spelling. Underscore name. So I'm going to pass in a list of names. So I'm just going to pass in 2 lists of names. So I have Blessing, and then I have Sandra. So I'm going to have here again, I'll have last underscore name. So I have my surname, I have Ihejirika, and then for Sandra, I'll give her Doe. Sandra Doe. So I'll then come here and say I want to create an inner loop, like having a nested, iterate this loop, having a child inside the parent, like a nested loop. So I'm going to now say for X, I'm using X, right? For X in first name, right? Then I pass this, and then also say for Y in last name. So I would say print X and Y. So this is how it's going to work. So I'm going to save this guy. I've saved it. I'll come to my terminal and run the code. So are you seeing it's looping over it, like you're having a nested loop? This guy is talking to this guy, Blessing is talking to Ihejirika, Blessing is talking to John Doe, Sandra is talking to Ihejirika, and Sandra is talking to John Doe. So we can actually use this type of looping to do some multiplication practices. Actually want to make a multiplication practice between digits. So this is a perfect example of how to do this kind of task. So this is how a nested loop works.